Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our Owen Mitchell webinar on family sleep. I'm Michaela Morris. I'm the Client Liaison Manager in Leeds, and we'll go more introductions later. Really good of you to join us. We're very aware that this is a tough and stressful time for many of us, and as Owen Mitchell is very much here to support you and navigate you in life's ups and downs, we wanted to do these series of webinars to connect our communities, our clients, our local communities, and our colleagues. And we hope that it will be of use to you. Please do feel free to share the content of the webinar after they are recorded. Thank you. A few bits of housekeeping. We'd be very grateful if you would send questions throughout the webinar. And this can be done on your Q&A function in the bottom right of the webinar screen. Also, please use this if you're having any technical difficulties, and one of our support team will get back to you. Thanks, Natasha and Olivia, for that. Also, if any of the questions are more of a personal nature and people's specific difficulties, we feel it'd be more appropriate to answer those after the webinar. And over the next few days, we will be emailing you. Also, if after the webinar you would like to email us any questions directly, the addresses of the presenters, Carmel and myself, are at the end of the presentation, and also the email address for our events team. We'd also really welcome other ideas for webinars in the future that would be of use to you and your colleagues and family and friends. Thank you for that. So, on to our webinar. I will say this is my first webinar, so if there's any technical difficulties, please bear with us. So, the focus of our webinar today is family sleep and the impact of COVID-19.
We're just also proud of how we know we're having great ideas.
The hosts today are myself, Michaela Morris, and Cara Morris. I'm an occupational therapist by background, and I have worked in mental health and in palliative care particularly, but also in other settings. Carmel and I are part of the National Client Liaison team, and we are a mixture of nurses, social workers, and occupational therapists. And we support our clients and their families to access rehabilitation, benefits, special education, and end-of-life care support. Obviously, at the moment, we're also providing very different kinds of support because of the pandemic, where a lot of our clients are very vulnerable and isolated. All our clients are living with the impact of catastrophic injury or industrial illness, and it's really great that we have this service to be able to support our families and individuals.
And I'm Carmel, the newest member of the Client Liaison team, and like Michaela, have many years of experience working with children and families in residential, educational and healthcare settings, most recently working at Leeds Children's Hospital as an acquired brain injury coordinator. And as Michaela already said, welcome to the webinar. What we're trying to identify with you today is some of the difficulties that many of us are experiencing. And we want to talk to you about how we can support ourselves and those in our households, including children, practice good habits for restful and restorative sleep. We'll look at some of those common difficulties with regarding to getting to sleep, staying asleep, and knowing how much sleep is the right amount for us. It might be helpful for you to have a pen and paper at the ready to take some notes as we go through some questions, and these will help you to reflect on your own sleep and the routines in your household. So I wanted to begin by acknowledging the tremendous amount of change and loss that we've all experienced over the last month or so. As far back as the beginning of February, people were becoming increasingly aware of the threat of COVID-19, and I think we were all part of the conversation about what might happen, when, who, and for how long. And this lack of certainty will have begun to have an impact on our behaviours, our thought processes, relationships, mood and work, long before the full force of lockdown restrictions were in place. Sleep is part of our daily routine. It's a time when we restore and process and recover. And we all have habits associated with sleep, whether these are good, bad, or otherwise. And so it's unrealistic for us to assume that sleep would not be affected by a global event such as that we are experiencing. So let's reflect on some of those changes associated with this initial uncertainty. Hopefully Michaela's going to move on the slides for me. Bit of a double act going on here. There we go. So I'm sure for many of you, the first thing that you noticed was a huge increase in news coverage. This was an emerging story, and perhaps you found yourself watching or reading much more news than you did before. There may even be some of you who deliberately turned off the television. Planning began. At work, we were exploring the possibilities of working from home, or maybe a change in working hours. At school, parents, children and teachers were all thinking about the possibility of school closures and what this would mean for childcare arrangements and continuing education. And at home, we began shopping. We began thinking about the needs of vulnerable relatives and friends. And so we all started to live with this sense of threat. And now, when we're going out for our walks or in the supermarket, there is still that underlying worry about older family members, those living alone. Will I catch the virus, for example? So for many weeks already, many more than simply the period of lockdown, our behaviours, life, work and social patterns have started to shift. An analogy might be to think of going on holiday. Before we go, we begin to count down the days. We shop for new clothes maybe, we pack bags, get organised, and probably many of you, like me, will have a bad night's sleep the night before you go, a mixture of nervous excitement and anticipation. But then, a few days later, we find that we're sleeping in late. We might be napping in the afternoon and dreaming more. Our minds, bodies, shifting and adjusting to a new and slower pace of life, and the lack of routine and the changes that that brings about. So it's therefore essential that we think about and recognise any changes in our sleep patterns as an expected and natural reaction to the changes around us. If we begin by acknowledging that changes in lifestyle result in changes in sleep habits, then we can start to assess which factors have the biggest and most negative effects for you. Over the next two slides, you will have the opportunity to reflect on what's happening in your household with regard to sleep. As a sleep practitioner, every conversation that I have with a client begins with an in-depth questionnaire. And whilst we don't have time to go through all of that here today, ask ourselves a number of key questions that may help to determine exactly what it is that's affecting us. And the answers may be very different for each one of us. Also assuming that all of you who've signed in today have done so because you feel that sleep is problematic. It's very rare that anybody asks for the help of a sleep practitioner if they feel that they're getting a good night's sleep already. So as we go through this slide, I'm going to deliberately pause, so don't worry, I haven't gone offline or anything. And this is to give you the chance to make some notes of the responses to the questions. These responses will help you to develop your plan for a good night's sleep. So our first consideration is, how has your daily routine changed? What time do you get up? Do you have breakfast, and is it the same as it used to be? How did I get to work or school before this event? Preparation for a good night's sleep begins when we first get up in the morning. What are your working patterns? Do you now log on at 7 a.m. to make sure that you can get on the server? Or are you up and doing things around the house before the children are getting up so that you've got time to do your job before you support them with homeschooling? Are you still checking and responding to emails at 11 o'clock at night? And if you're not currently working or if you're furloughed, what is your purpose or motivation for getting up? How active are you? This should be looking at non-work activity, actually moving about. Previously, you may have had a walk to the bus stop or a train station, or maybe even just a walk from the car park. And even if you were someone who didn't previously go to the gym 6 times a week, the likelihood is that you're moving around far more than you are at the moment. At the very least, we should try to ensure that we maintain similar levels of activity to what was our previous normal. I'm naturally a very active person. I walk and run almost every day, and so I've really had to consciously plan how I fit in my daily activity around changing responsibilities. So this now includes PE with Joe Wicks in the morning with my children and doing laps around the garden after dinner. But it's also important to remember with activity that I'm going to struggle to get to sleep if I've chosen to do an intensive workout an hour before bed. Are you eating right? Cut yourself some slack. After a poor night's sleep, no one fancies a bowl of muesli. And the chances are you've either skipped breakfast altogether and headed straight for a strong cup of coffee, or you've eaten an entire packet of biscuits before you even know it. Energy in from food intake needs to equal the energy burnt through activity. And whilst we probably all know that this affects our weight, it also affects our sleep. When we sleep, our bodies need to process. They need to rest, and this includes our digestive system. You're not going to sleep well if your body is having to process the family-sized pizza you ate an hour before bed. But equally, you're going to wake frequently throughout the night if you're hungry. And this is particularly important to remember for those of us with children at home who may still be going through rapid periods of growth and have additional food needs. What's your day-night cycle like? Do you have a good balance? Parents and carers will regularly tell you that they've spent months, sometimes years, trying to establish a day-night routine for a child. Our biology relies on natural sunlight to wake us up and energize us, but it also relies on the production of melatonin, a natural sleep hormone that only occurs in low light, in the evening and during the night. It is essential for good sleep to differentiate between daytime and nighttime hours. And regardless of the weather, it's important that we get outside, or at the very least, spend time next to a window each day. Some of you may be teenagers, spending hours gaming, or indeed you yourself may be spending more time in front of a screen, whether that's a TV, a tablet, a phone, or a computer. Think about when you want to be going to sleep and allow at least 1 full hour's break between screen and pillow. All screens, even those with filters, emit blue light, which tricks our brains into thinking that it's still daytime and therefore we still need to be active and not tired. Switching off screens allows our brains to adjust to nighttime mode and begin to produce melatonin. Ideally, I always advise for there to be no screens in bedrooms, but appreciate that this might not be completely practical for you or your household. So again, thinking about who's in your household, can you agree for a time when Wi-Fi access might be switched off? Who else is sleeping in your household? I know that there may be some of you who are isolating on your own, And this lack of social contact brings its own challenges. But for most of us, we are adjusting to spending many more hours in the same space as others, our partners, children, other tenants. And even those of us who are at home on our own, we will be experiencing changes in the day and nighttime movements of neighbours. So even when we're in isolation, we're not isolated from other people's behaviours, including their sleep behaviours. Everyone's sleep is dependent on routine, rituals and habits that we perform each and every day that set us up for the night ahead. As human beings, we're incredibly sensitive to the sights, sounds and even smells that surround us. This means that even if nothing has changed in your own routine, the changes in others may still be impacting upon you. An example to think about, maybe you live on a main road and you've become used to the constant traffic noise. In fact, that background noise has become the background noise to your sleep. The fact that the road is now much less busy will affect the levels of noise, and therefore it's possible subconsciously that it's now too quiet for you to fall asleep. Similarly, the noise of somebody watching TV late at night or moving around the house or even next door may disturb and disrupt your sleep patterns. As working hours have shifted, people may be active and inactive at different times of the day, and it's likely that you will be affected by this. Children too have experienced massive changes in their daily routines, not just because of the closure of schools, but also the lack of sports clubs, after-school provision and hobbies. Their levels of activity have most likely reduced significantly, and without the requirement to get up to school each day, it's easy to slip into habits of lying in and staying up late. Children, like adults, have been emotionally and psychologically affected by COVID-19, which may give rise to sleep disorders, making them more prone to waking during the night. And we'll come back to look at these in a bit more detail later on. And finally, ask yourself, how is your mental and physical health? As we've just highlighted, there is undoubtedly a huge psychological impact associated with simply living through the COVID-19 experience. And many of us will be experiencing increased concern about our own health and the health of those we know and love. Separation from family and friends is emotionally draining. There are huge financial implications with reduced working hours, job insecurity and job losses, and there is still massive uncertainty about what will happen next. Our biology has been set up to seek out known and predictable situations. They make us feel safe. And when situations are uncertain, our bodies still react in exactly the same way that they have done for thousands of years, by activating our fight, flight, or freeze responses. To help explain these will help to explain why some people resist or fight against the rules that have been imposed upon them, why others just want to run away and pretend that nothing's happening, and why some of us may feel incapable of doing anything. We feel stuck or frozen. This basic biological response, which releases hormones into our body, in turn affects our ability to switch off, wind down, relax, and sleep. We're in a more permanent state of high alert or anxiety or exhaustion, and all of these are going to impact on our sleep. And of course, we mustn't forget that any pre-existing or new physical and mental health needs that continue regardless of COVID-19. This hasn't negated things such as heart disease or diabetes. They haven't disappeared. And if you were experiencing poor mental health before this situation arose, the likelihood is that those symptoms haven't gone away. In fact, you may feel them even more acutely. As human beings, we're still having accidents, we're still getting poorly, and we might be managing chronic conditions despite this threat of the coronavirus. At all times, our mental and physical health affect our ability to get a good night's sleep. So for me, the next slide really is the most important, because hopefully you are able to use your responses to the previous questions to help you to develop a plan for your own good night's sleep?
Apologies, Carmel. I've been trying to get to the next slide.
No problem. So whilst we just wait for the system to catch up with us, hopefully everybody has been able to make some notes as they've gone through. So what I've tried to do with those questions is reframe them to be more proactive. And the great thing about this slide is that it's something that you can use every day. Regardless of how good or bad your night's sleep has been the day before, you can use the planning for a good night's sleep slide to help you think about what you want to do this day. Back on, please, Michaela. Back on more, Michaela.
Sorry.
And one more. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so thinking about this as being a plan of action, you need to start the day by planning what time you want to go to sleep. You need to think about how you're going to achieve whatever your goals are, whatever your motivation is for that day, whether it be a work goal or a personal goal or something that you need to be achieving in the household. And try to remember to be smart about them. Don't set yourself up to fail. Ask yourself each day, how am I going to make sure that I get enough exercise at sensible times to get that balance? And does my food intake and activity output balance? We've all seen lots of adverts on the television and on the news about batch cooking and different recipes that are seen being shared on the internet. So we've got time, probably more time than we had before, to plan our food a little bit better. The next question I know will be one that's really difficult for some of you, but when am I going to switch those screens off? When am I going to actively make the choice that it's time to prepare for bed? And as I said before, even if there are other people sharing the household with you, particularly teenagers, can you agree, can you negotiate a time when the screens can be switched off? Who else is keeping you awake? And is there anything that you can do to change that? Is there anything that you can do to help that person? Hopefully, through some of the other discussion points that we've gone through, it started you thinking about small changes that you may be able to make, not just yourself, but for others in your household. Make sure that you check in with yourself. Ask yourself, how are you feeling today? Your mood is definitely going to impact on not only how you approach the day ahead, but also how you prepare for the night ahead. And so the final part of that plan needs to be, how are you going to reduce and manage your anxiety today? Sleep needs routine. When your routine is changed, either by choice, something like going on holiday, or imposed upon you, like we're all experiencing now, there's always going to be a period of adjustment. You're always going to need to settle in. When I support families with sleep disorders, we often start by reviewing the existing routines and make small, manageable changes that will promote better sleep. Research has proven that changes in behaviour around sleep, which is often referred to as sleep hygiene, are more effective than prescribed melatonin in increasing sleeping hours. So I wanted to go through some effective sleep routine techniques that you can employ at home. The first thing on the slide, we've gone on a bit too quickly. So the first thing on the slide there talks about caffeine. NHS guidelines say that we should avoid caffeine after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which I bet for lots of you will seem really early. And yes, it does include chocolate because there is caffeine in chocolate, and there is also caffeine in decaffeinated drinks. Not all of the caffeine has been reduced, so we really need to be moving to completely caffeine-free drinks after 4 o'clock. As we talked about before, we also don't want to have any big meals. And we need to think about preparing for sleep at least an hour before we get into bed. Start thinking about, what do I need to do? Are there things I need to get ready for the next day? Am I going to put my pajamas on the radiator to warm up? Am I going to have a bath or a shower? Do I want to do some reading or knitting or whatever your calming and relaxing activity is? For children, this is a great time to be introducing some really quiet hand-eye coordination activities such as Lego or jigsaw puzzles or colouring, and that's going to help them prepare for sleep. You need to follow exactly the same routine every day. I can't emphasise enough how much good quality sleep relies on routine. Drugs and alcohol will also affect the quality of your sleep, and I know that Michaela is going to talk a little bit more about that in later slides. And in terms of how much sleep is too much, not enough, adults need to be aiming for around about 7 hours. But everybody's different, and you're not going to be expending as much energy as you have done previously. And it's also really important to remember that nobody sleeps through. Even those annoying parents who tell you that their 12-week-old baby sleeps through, it's not true. That baby will be waking. They will have a natural sleep cycle that they go through multiple times throughout the night. It's just that sometimes we don't become consciously aware of becoming more wakeful. It's also really important that we get up at the same time each day. Again, it's about establishing that routine. Moving on then, let's think about your bedroom environment. Ideally, you should be sleeping in a room around about 18 degrees. Now that actually feels quite cool. We've been having some really lovely weather recently. 18 degrees is going to be cooler than that. But the reason that it needs to be that temperature is that it's the biological response of cooling down that actually helps us to go to sleep. We've talked about screens already, so I'm not going to go into that again. Bedrooms should be dark. And when I say dark, I mean really dark. You shouldn't be able to see across the room, ideally, if you want a dark space. But I know, again, that there will be many of you for whom you need to have some form of light on, whether it be a night light for children or maybe a hall light or a bathroom light. The important thing is that whatever the conditions are when you go to sleep, when you fall asleep, they need to be maintained throughout the night. And again, that's really important to think about with regard to children. Lots and lots of children need to have a light on in order to go to sleep. That's become their sleep association. And so when grown-ups go up the stairs to bed 4 hours later and turn the light off, they change the sleeping environment for the child, and that in itself can cause a child to wake up. So as I said before, a lot of what we're talking about today is about just reviewing what your existing routines are and looking at what small changes, manageable changes you can make. I've put in there about a light supper, particularly thinking about anyone who doesn't feel that they're eating enough throughout the day, and also for children who may need to have something just before bed. Not so much a problem at the moment, but when children are at nursery school and after school clubs, often they'll be having their tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they might not be being given anything to eat until 7 o'clock the next morning. And that's a very long period of time to go. So just think about, do they actually need a top-up before bed to get them through the night? I've talked about the temperature already. So a warm bath and shower can really help that cooling process. You warm yourself up in a bath or shower, and then you cool down naturally afterwards, which is going to help your body to relax. And finally, as we talked about, I know that at the moment everybody is having to use their space very differently. If you are in a situation where you're having to work in your bedroom, please pack it away or cover it up with a sheet before you try and get to sleep at night. So I'm now going to be handing you over to Michaela, and she's going to continue to look at some of the common sleep difficulties that many of you may be experiencing.
So hello again. As Carla described, so many of the sleep difficulties that we experience are affected by our anxiety. So I'm going to be looking more at anxiety and the way we can manage that. On this slide, you'll see that there are quite a few sleep difficulties that we may be experiencing. Some of them we were experiencing before the pandemic, but some of them are just louder, or we're much more aware of them. I think probably on that list, the things that are more heightened for a lot of us would be the getting to sleep, because our thoughts and our worries, our brains wake up as we put our head on the pillow, but also getting back to sleep. That will be very prominent at the moment. Also, I think it's very important to think about our mindset. And what I mean by that is that when we're having a tough day or we're reflecting on the night before, so often we get into that pattern of, oh, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. Oh, I hope I'm not going to wake up 3 times or wake up at 4 and not be able to get back to sleep. And if we've got that ongoing anxiety building up during the day, we're kind of setting it up to be a bad night. I can't sleep. There's kind of a bit of a brick wall there, isn't there? In the same way, and it might seem a silly example, but it's the same kind of thinking, if I'm dreading that family party with Aunt Mabel, where I'm not going to get on with anyone, I'm probably going to have an argument and make a complete fool of myself, and I'm not going to enjoy it, and that's probably what is going to happen. So what I need to do is to reframe it and say, Aunt Mabel's birthday party isn't my favourite activity, but it's important to her, and actually, let's just wait and see. So I'm reducing the stress, I'm reducing the expectation, and I think we need to be much more aware during the day of how our worry about our sleep or our expectation can put us under pressure. And I think we need to reframe that, but also be kind to ourselves. Actually, I haven't got to get up at 6:15 to go to work tomorrow morning. I just got to go from my bedroom to my study or wherever. But actually, if I do get a bit less, or if it isn't brilliant quality, it's okay. And as Carmel said earlier, the great thing about sleep is we get to try again the next day. So our mindset is really, really important. Apologies, my mouse doesn't seem to want to connect. Bear with me, just on to the next screen where I'm going to be talking more about the impact of the anxiety that we have during the day. So clearly, any sense of anxiety we have during the day is going to affect our sleep. So actually being aware of that anxiety, by understanding it more, we can do more about it. And I think as well as the flight, fight and freeze response that Carmel talked about earlier, we also have a more subtle sense at the moment of collective threat. We're all feeling threatened. It might not be a very conscious sense, but I think it is very much there. We may feel a sense of threat when we are doing the following things. Some of them are our behaviours. Some of them are activities like watching the news. Some of them might be the worry, thinking about our children or our relatives or our job or our finances. But all of those are very big questions. They're also things that make us feel very threatened. And when we're threatened more than just the ordinary ups and downs and stresses of life, our bodies, minds, and our behaviours do react in different ways because we're responding from that threat part of our brain. So the reactions we may be experiencing, as I say, in terms of our thinking, our behaviours, our relationships, and also physically in our body. And sometimes it's actually our body that is the first thing that we sense, the first thing we hear, and by hearing it, we can do something about it. So I'll just give you a moment to look at those, and it might surprise us as to how many of those are happening. Not necessarily all the time, but they come and go, and sometimes they surprise us. We're not aware that we're feeling so anxious or under threat. And other times, they just pass quickly. But I think it's important to recognise that all of those are very normal reactions. They're reactions that people who lived in caves and were fighting off animals or chasing animals to hunt them had all those things. because they need to freeze, to fight, or to fly. But when we're in a sense of trauma and a sense of threat, obviously this is going to affect our sleep. If you look at that list and think, gosh, if I'm feeling a lot of those during the day, is it any wonder that my sleep is affected and that I'm having more times of waking up, of being restless, or more animated dreams? So the good news is that we can shift our brain to a different part. When we're in the threat system, we focus on those things. They become louder, they become more dominant. So what we need to do is to access what we call our parasympathetic nervous system, or more commonly and easily known as our rest and digest system, which is the system that we access when we're doing something we really enjoy, when we're focusing on having a good time with our grandchildren, or reading a good book, or playing music. It's a very different part of our brain. And when we're in these times, what we need to do is to actively access that part of the brain, not just stumble across it because we happen to be watching a absorbing television program, but actually actively access it at multiple times during the day. It's also about that sense of feeling the difference. When we're more aware of our anxiety and we have changed to the other system, we can help ourselves by recognizing, that's what it feels like. I'd forgotten how it feels to relax. We need to remind our brain so that when we are more anxious, we can access it. But also, obviously, we then can sense our anxiety in a greater way. So ways to manage our anxiety. And obviously, this will be different for different people. Some people find it much easier. Other people do find it harder. But I think we've got the time at the moment to remind ourselves of how to do it, but also what works for us. There's some examples up there. But I think one thing I really want to focus on, because there's no equipment needed, it takes minutes, and it is so easy and so effective, is diaphragmatic breathing, or deep or belly breathing. Any of you who've done yoga or mindfulness will be used to this technique. But for a lot of us, it's something we don't access enough, and it is so easy. Basically, when we are breathing at a normal rate, we don't think about it. It's automatic. However, when we're anxious or we're feeling a sense of threat, we tend to breathe in a more shallow way, not so shallow that it becomes a problem and we hyperventilate, but more we're just getting that balance of carbon dioxide out and oxygen in, just a little unequal. And what our brains do then when we're really anxious is it tries and adjusts it for itself. But what we can do is get that balance back regularly during the day. What I want you to do now is put your hands on your stomach. And it's called belly breathing because when I'm doing deep breathing, I can feel my hands, if they're crossed like that, I can feel my stomach coming in and out when I do a much deeper and more quality breath. When I focus on my breathing and I slow it down, I'm immediately getting that balance back, slowing my system down and accessing that part of my brain. What I suggest you do is you practice it, because obviously if we're highly anxious, oh my gosh, how do I do that technique? It's not going to be the time to do it. You need to practice it. You can do it while you're waiting for the kettle to boil, cleaning your teeth in that supermarket queue, while you're waiting for an email to come through. I, in these stressful times, have started doing deep breathing before every phone call or every change of activity. And I've definitely noticed the difference in my sleep and my anxiety by the end of the day. On the resources list at the end of the presentation, there's a link to an NHS guide which talks you through exactly how to do it, and I'd really recommend you have a look at that. Also, in Leeds, I'm proud to say our charity of the year is Maggie's Yorkshire. And on Maggie's Yorkshire's series of tweets recently, they've done some relaxation exercises, and their psychologist is leading through a diaphragmatic breathing exercise. Their tweet is #Maggie's York, and that is on the screen as well. So do access that. Sometimes people find it much easier to learn in a visual way rather than in a written way. The other thing I think we really need to recognize is that we can't control the thoughts that come into our head. So a thought that comes into our head when we think about our isolated neighbor or our grandparent a distance away, or someone who is ill, or someone we know who works in a hospital. We can't control the thoughts that come in, the worry thoughts, the catastrophizing thoughts, the negative thoughts. But what we all can control, and having some control at the moment is a good thing, is what we do with them. I can have a worried thought and I can build it up, get in that hamster wheel and escalate it very, very quickly. Or I can say, oh, I'm anxious. Notice I'm anxious. Maybe I'm feeling it in my body, my stomach's tight, my heart's racing, and say, can I do something different with that thought? Can I change my activity, turn off the news, go and make a drink, obviously decaffeinated or caffeine-free after 4 o'clock. Thank you, Carmel. But it's really important that we change that track, because we all know that when those thoughts get out of hand, it's harder to bring them back. A question I find very useful, and I certainly have recommended to many people, and they've said that they find it useful, is the very simple question. When I'm worrying and I'm getting myself in a pickle, I just ask myself this question: is this helpful? If the answer is no, it's not helpful. It's making me more anxious. It's making my mood more low. It's making me more grumpy and snappy. If the answer is no, do something else. Shake away that thought. Or say, actually, I can't deal with that. I don't know the answer to how long the lockdown is going to be in place, or whatever it is. If the worry is a practical one, like, oh gosh, I must remember to book my online shopping order, it's a helpful worry. You can do something about it. But if this worry is not helpful, and actually there's nothing I can do or change, move on from it. A really useful question. So I think many of us have found in this time that actually we have had time to learn something new, whether it be a language or dusting off our guitar or our knitting needles and doing something that we think, oh, if I had time, I'd read that book, or I'd clear out that cupboard, or I'd make that patchwork, or I'd certainly attack the garden. All those things we can use to help manage our anxiety, which then help us with our sleep, but also give us a chance to have a sense of purpose and structure to our day. So, sorry, I think I've gone backwards. There we go. Bear with me. Thank you. The final thing I want to focus on is self-care, because I think it is so important that as well as trying to look after each other, we need to look after ourselves. A friend of mine said to me at the beginning of lockdown, gosh, this is a bit like Christmas without the presents. We're all lazing around, we're all eating too much, we're taking loads of time over meals, we're doing lots of games and TV together, and there's a bit of a novelty about it. But if you're anything like me, by the end of the Christmas and New Year period, I actually want to get back to routine. So what day is it? Is it a bank holiday? Isn't it? And I think after a month of lockdown, having that permanent sense of, gosh, I need some routine. And as Carmel has so eloquently said, routine is really helpful for sleep, but also for our well-being and our mental health and our self-care. So that the new normal that we now face is saying, okay, so I'm kind of getting used to this, good days and bad days, but what works well for me? If you know that staying up late and watching TV is your way of coping, then that might be what you do. But then sit back and think, actually, no, it's not, because you look at the effect on the next day. Having good routine, maybe different routine to before, but it's so important. But I also think as part of self-care, it's really important that we don't give ourselves a hard time when we have a bad day, where we weren't very effective at our work. We were snappy with our children. We didn't want to FaceTime Great Aunt Mabel. Whatever it is, don't put yourself down about it. We can all, particularly when we're anxious or we're low or we're stressed, the person we give the hardest time to is ourselves. I should be coping better. There are people worse off than me. I've got a garden. I'm not living in a small flat. I've still got a job. So we put that pressure on. Whereas actually what we need to do is think, well, what would I say to a friend who's struggling in a similar way? Would I say to them, snap out of it, oh, you're lucky, you're better off than most. No, you wouldn't. You'd say, hang on a minute, take a minute, be kind to yourself. It's okay to feel how you're feeling, but how can we shift that feeling so that the day improves and our sleep and the next day improves? So reduce those oughts, shoulds and musts, and very much change them and reframe them maybe as, I want to, I can, I'll give it a try. So being gentle and kind to ourselves in this new normal. It's really important for us to be kind to ourselves and also to be cheered and nourished by the enormous acts of kindness and generosity that we see on the news and on social media. Focus on those good things, focus on the quality time that we've had with each other and all the good things. It's worth taking time to reflect and to keep looking after yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Michaela. So I think we do still have some time for questions, and we have had some questions come through. The first question says, what do I do? I've got older kids staying up late and then getting up in the afternoon, and this is having an impact on younger siblings. So I think this is something that we referred to earlier on in the presentation. I think what's important to remember with regard to older children, and I guess what we're talking about here is teenagers, is that actually their body clocks are going through a natural change and their circadian rhythms have shifted. So they are going to be out of sync with everybody else in the house anyway. So I think a little bit of acknowledgement and recognition can go a long way. But hopefully, using that plan that we talked about earlier on, can that be used in the family as a tool for setting some agreed ground rules or house rules as to regards to sleep, as well as everything else that needs to be done. And I think just going on what Michaela was saying at the end of her presentation there, that actually we've got so much more time than we had before, many of us, and this includes those teenagers, that maybe what they're looking for is a different focus and a different purpose, and perhaps an activity during daytime hours, maybe with their younger sibling, could provide them with the motivation that they need to help them shift their sleep patterns.
I'd so agree, and I think so many teenagers, particularly as we're hearing on the news, are struggling with their mental health because they haven't got the connection with their friends. Their exams have gone out the window, so it's a very unknown and very uncertain time. And as with many teenagers, they don't necessarily want to talk to their parents about those things. So I think it's important that they do have access to friends and that support, but also, if you are concerned, that they do have mental health support as needed. Also, I think it's really important that if there is the opportunity for them to get involved, whether it be, as Cara says, working with their younger brothers and sisters or helping a neighbour get some shopping or whatever, actually that sense of engagement with their locality can really help.
Thanks, Michaela. The second question that came through was, how can I get a good night's sleep when my brother, and it said then the context is he's 18 with special educational needs, is awake till 4 a.m. And sadly, I think this is a reality for many of the families that we support. I think it's important that we just reflect on a common misconception, which is that children with special educational needs just have bad sleep. That's not necessarily the case, and it doesn't have to be the case. And certainly all of the evidence shows that taking forward that behavioural approach as a family to improving sleep can be effective, just as effective with children with special educational needs as it can with a neurotypical child. I think what I would also say about that is that, again, think about the plan. So what's happening that's causing your brother's sleep disturbance through the night? Is it to do with a daytime-nighttime imbalance? Is it to do with levels of activity? What are the small changes that you might be able to make as a family that can help to alter, to improve his sleep habits.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'm afraid I can't access the questions, Carmel, so if you can field them, that would be great.
I think there's one here that you might like to tackle, Michaela, and that is, how am I supposed to sleep when my partner's snoring is keeping me awake?
A common problem, and I think we need to recognise that actually lying in the bedroom awake, frustrated, not being able to get to sleep is not a good thing, because it's really important that we associate the bedroom with good sleep. I think there needs to be maybe some negotiation, especially if the snoring is a problem that is ongoing. If there is another room, if there is the chance of you being able to go to sleep before your partner, having worked on your anxiety, doing all the things that Carmel and I suggest, hopefully that your sleep is deep enough that it's not going to affect them. Also, there is some good advice on sleeping positions for snorers, and some people do find the nasal pressure equipment helpful. I'm sure on Google there will be tips for snoring. I'm not an expert on snoring, although apparently I snore myself, but that's another matter. But I think it's really important that for you to recognise that actually if the snoring is getting you down and is affecting your sleep, and I imagine tension in your relationship, that if you do have the ability to be in another room. But on the proviso is that actually if that tension and anxiety is for the person listening to snoring, they should stay in the bedroom and it's the snorer who should move, so that they can reclaim their bedroom as a place where they sleep, and hopefully if you're more relaxed, you will cope with the snoring better.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michaela. And a final question came in asking for what's the difference between a child having nightmares and night terrors? And I think that's a really good question, and something a lot of people struggle to differentiate between. So the key factor is that if a child is having a night terror, they will be unresponsive to you being in the room, to calling their name, to giving them comfort. Because actually, although they may be screaming, they may be thrashing about, they're not consciously aware of what's happening. And in the morning, they will have no recollection of that horrific event. So night terrors are far more traumatic often for the viewer, for the parent carer to observe, than they are for the child who has no knowledge of them happening. Nightmares, obviously, as we talked about before, lots of people are experiencing much more vivid dreams at the moment, and some of those may well be unpleasant in nature, and for children can be very frightening. Again, looking back at the stuff that we've done beforehand, using opportunities throughout the day to review with children if they do have any underlying anxieties or worries, that those can be worked through, talked through with the family, and doing that away from the bedroom and away from the bedtime routine. Lots and lots of people that I talk to say, oh, well, what we do at bedtime is that we sit down together and we have a chat about the day. But for a child, that may then be the time that they bring up a whole load of worries that they've been bottling up for the previous 12 hours, and it sets them up then for an unsettled night. So it's really important to make that distance, keep that distance between an opportunity to discuss worries and concerns and the quiet, relaxing, positive experience of going to bed at night.
And I think also, although this probably maybe applies more to adults, but I think would apply to children as well, anecdotally, a lot of people have been saying to me how they're amazed at how much more they're dreaming or how much more they're remembering their dreams in a similar way when they're on holiday. And I think because we don't have the ordinary stresses of, am I going to get to school on time in the morning? We've got other stresses that sometimes we're sleeping longer. And I think actually our dreams are that way of the mind and the body processing, reflecting, working through. And so it is quite natural that we do remember them more and that we're more aware of them. But also I think people have also been saying that, oh, I've been thinking about so-and-so I haven't been in touch with for years, or who died, 5 years ago. And you think, well, actually, maybe then now is a good time to say, I'm going to reconnect with those people, all those positive memories, or relook at something that maybe I have been avoiding. So it's actually saying, maybe there are good things about having those dreams. Obviously, some of them are very unsettling, very disturbing, but all the more reason Connell says that during the day, we recognize our anxiety, our anxious thoughts, our worries, and deal with them so that we're less likely for them to be released and, cause us difficulties at night.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that, Michaela, that it may not be that people are, in fact, dreaming more, but it might be that they are remembering their dreams more. And there's a very simple reason that can happen, and that's because if they're used to being woken up by a mechanical alarm clock, that will prevent their brain from storing the memory of their dream, whereas if they're allowed to wake up more naturally, which is probably the case for a lot more people now, then the likelihood that they will remember more detail of their dream increases. Absolutely. So they're coming to the end of a deep sleep cycle rather than being interrupted. I'd very much agree. Can I just say, someone has sent me a message about their mother struggling with their sleep because she's recently bereaved. I will follow that up after the webinar is over. Thank you for your message. Thank you. So I think that's about it from us. Michaela, I think, is going to go through the final slide that has a list of resources. And if you have been prompted to think about or to raise any other questions or concerns, please do send those through to us, and we'll get through as many of them as we can and respond to you individually. Thank you. So just put a few resources. There are many, many resources out there in terms of sleep, in terms of anxiety. But we particularly put some information for some of the charities working with disabled children, some mental health websites there, but also the breathing exercise and relaxation exercises. If you want more specific advice, then, as Carol said, do email us. But also, you're very welcome to email our events team if there's any webinars that you think would be useful for the future. I'd just like to point out on this screen the Erwin Mitchell coronavirus response page on our website. There are some really useful resources. Obviously, there's the access to our legal services that you would be very welcome to make any inquiries if you're needing support to navigate through these difficult times. But also, there's some really good resources in terms of well-being, in terms of finances and benefits, and so many of the things that are affecting us. So do feel free to use that information and also pass it on to other people if that would be useful to you. And there's the events email address if you'd like to email them or ourselves for further information or support. Thank you so much for joining us. Just remind us all to keep safe, keep well, and keep looking after yourself as well. Thank you.